The $3 million FNCS has just finished across all regions to cap off Season 6, and what does it take to become the top of the leaderboards in your region? Well, let's break down the top 3 teams from every region, specifically looking for trends that players can carry over into Season 7 and beyond. The start of a good analysis starts at the beginning of the matches, and specifically their drop spots. There are a few notable trends we can see here. Firstly, Sweaty Sands, Lazy Lake and Dirty Docks are the most popular. This is almost definitely due to the sheer number of chests in these POIs more than anything else, such as position on the map. Probably the most surprising thing about these drops is the lack of pepper focus, given these were the only mobility this season. I would have suspected more Catty Corner and Holly Hedges performances, given these are drop spots with tons of fruit boxes. We did see 2 teams from Misty, which has 5 fruit boxes, and 1 team from Boney, which has 6, so not completely void of pepper focus, but less than I was expecting. This could be down to the hype of Catty Corner, making it contested on some regions, therefore making it not as good even with the huge pepper potential. Speaking of contested drop spots, every single team that placed top 3 in the region landed at a drop spot that was uncontested. This probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone by this point, but it again pushes the narrative that being contested is just too much of a detriment to your team's potential to do well. And on average, these looting paths in these drop spots had 30 chests total, averaging 10 chests per player. Interestingly, this is higher than the 7 to 8 chests that I've noted from previous seasons, and even the solo cash cup data I recorded this season was in the 7 to 8 category as well, potentially suggesting that this season in particular, teams actually needed a little bit more loot to do better than in previous seasons. Drop spots is interesting, but what about their actual playstyle? The distribution of placements across these top 3 teams is really interesting. Collectively, there were 33 Victory Royales across all of the teams, which was actually more than the games that they placed 19th till 33rd. This could be because these teams were hugely uncontested so didn't fight off spawn, but also that their Storm Surge strategies were on point. Teams who didn't struggle with Storm Surge always had a plan. Tayson, Nayte and 4ZR, for example, struggled with Storm Surge all the way through the qualifiers, but come finals they had a plan to rotate early out of Sweaty Sands and be in a position to get tags 2 minutes before the first zone had even closed. To back this up, there were only 9 games out of the 252 that one of these teams didn't gain any points, and there was no teams who had multiple 0-point games. So if you're looking to win an FNCS or place top 3, it's unlikely that you'll be able to keep ahead of the pack with multiple 0-point games. There's also a very interesting spike at the 16 teams remaining, where 10 of the games were lost. This is roughly the amount of teams remaining in these style of lobbies when the first zone starts moving, which suggests that one of the bigger early downfalls of these teams was in the 5th to 6th zone transition, potentially meaning they got a max 5th or 6th zone and failed to rotate it accordingly, or because their mid game was bad and they weren't set up with the proper loot to keep them going through endgame. Take for example Vagnar, I4X Pro and Dexifite, who won the Middle East region. Their game 6, they got into a difficult fight in the mid game and had to use the majority of their heals, meaning that when they pulled out a max distance first moving, since they didn't have the best materials, they had to go for an impact elimination to keep them moving, which ultimately ended in their demise. The rest of the placements in endgame are relatively self-explanatory from this point on, averaging around 10 up until top 6. However, there's a really interesting spike, since 25 out of the 252 games, the entire team was eliminated at 6th place, which is 10%. A lot of these can be explained by a team making one simple mistake that threw their game. Take Game 9 from Kadu, Sion and King from the Brazil region. They positioned on height, but Kadu overpeaks and gets beamed, leading to the team losing height and eventually being wiped out. What's interesting is that the first and seconds take up 60 out of the 252 games, which is 23.8%. So no surprise, in order to get a top 3 in your region, getting a ton of firsts and second is probably a good idea. The short summary, in 1/4 of your games, come at least top 2. The 2 teams to get the most wins were Bathan, Zedox and CO, who had 4 and placed 2nd on OCE, and Queasy, Trulex and Juriki, who had 3 and 1 EU. Interestingly, they both dropped at the Hydro 16 and Flush Factory split. These 2 teams had one sole focus, and that was height in 4th to 5th zone. They always placed themselves as close to height as possible in 4th so that they could inch their way when the 5th zone appeared. Once you're on height in the 5th zone, usually you're contested there by the other team on the opposite height. There's a bit of zone RNG when it comes to zone pools, but if it pulls to a side that benefits no one, these teams put a huge focus into getting ahead and staying to the edge of the zone and continually pressuring the team on the opposite height. And even when they lose height, they still put an entire focus into chopping out height teams and regaining it. To put it simply, they just wanted height more than the rest of the lobby. The larger amount of wins directly correlated with the sheer effort and focus they put into taking height in the 5th zone. However, the downside of this is when the teams don't get height, they often don't get as many points as the other low and mid ground teams. However, Bayth and Zedox and CO alongside Queasy, Rehx and Duriki clearly pulled this off to secure 2nd and 1st in their respective regions. The main notable ones here were Deyy, Mero and Reverse, who were the only one to win the region with 0 victory royales, which will come to their slaying ability a bit later. But winning the games doesn't necessarily mean you're winning the region, as we found in OCE, where despite Bayth and Zedox and CO having 4 victory royales, Muzz, Looter and Speedy won the entire region with an incredible 5.5 average placement across their 12 games. Across all regions, their consistency was really only beaten out by one team, which should surprise no one, as Arkhram, Rehx and Epikwhale have an average placement of 5.33, winning the NA West region. This team is always a pleasure to VOD review, and you'd think I'd be bored of watching them win every season, but you're very wrong. Their strategy is very similar to what it always is: rotate early to a storm surge location. In this particular example, they're in position over 2 minutes before the first circle has closed. From here, they end up being 436 above the first threshold, then pretty much every zone after this they instantly rotate to get center. They only end up going for elims when they're 100% safe to, as they don't mindlessly go for fights for no reason. Their endgame is poetry. They traditionally have always been a low to mid ground team, but always are so versatile now that they can play any layer extremely well. The trends you see in every endgame is them rotating on the dead side of moving zones and staying as far ahead as possible. This way, if they see height is free, they can take it from ahead of the zone, and if not, they can just keep away from the others and hold them. If you want to learn how to play the game, watch these guys. Interestingly, out of the top teams who had the best average placement, Scented, Commandment and Edgey had the 3rd best of 6.07 but didn't win the NA East region, but that's because it's not all about placement, so let's take a deeper dive into the eliminations. Looking at the graph of eliminations, there's not really too much of a surprise. 3 eliminations per game being the most common, and the graph just decreases as the eliminations go higher. There was a considerable amount of 13 elimination games, but this isn't a special number. I honestly think this is just more of a coincidence of big pop-off games. Out of the games that have over 10 eliminations, the distribution between regions are quite interesting. The average per region was 3.33, yet Middle East had an impressive 8 games where the top 3 teams had over 10 eliminations. This ties into the fact that most people from the Middle East region say how aggressive this region is, but not only that, the top teams in this region are very successfully aggressive in comparison to the rest. However, this is a little deceiving, as they weren't the region with the highest average eliminations, as this was OCE who had 5.75 in comparison to Middle East's 5.33. This would suggest that the huge over 10 elimination games in the Middle East shows that these teams had a lot higher pop-off potential, not necessarily that they were as consistent getting high elimination games as the OCE teams. The main exception to this is Asia, who had an incredibly close results page, but also had the lowest average eliminations of all regions. So who are the teams who were fragging out the hardest? Well, unsurprisingly, the top 3 teams who had the highest average eliminations per game also won their regions, being Middle East, NA East and OCE. With a nutty 6.33 average eliminations a game, Deyy, Mero and Reverse had 3 double-digit elimination games. The secret to their success was quite simple: confidence and aggression. They were always looking for a fight in the second zone to get them through the storm surge, and won this nearly every game. This often resulted in having over 6 eliminations coming into the moving zones. Moving zones for this team was very interesting, however, as they were so incredibly aggressive. This honestly looked like they were just W-keying all the teams in the lobby. One of the issues that I saw with this, however, is the fact that they often do this as solos way too frequently, which often resulted in one of them being eliminated and probably the reason they got 0 wins. They were so aggressive that in one game, Mero even managed to take height as a solo and nearly clutch out the entire win by himself. These guys were just so much more confident and aggressive than the rest of the lobby that they can just apply that continual pressure when everyone is scared and pick up relatively easy eliminations. Obviously, they're nuts fighters individually as well. Muzz, Looter and Speedy, who won the OCE region, however, had a slightly higher average eliminations of 6.58, and their spacing and teamwork is exactly why these guys popped off. They played a low to mid ground layer mainly and were always side by side. Given they had a great full tarp for them built already, they're safe from the majority of angles, meaning that when they make an edit or a peek, they're safe and they have a full team there to assist them on every elimination. This kind of spacing is absolutely critical when playing low to mid ground layers, and it's one of the reasons why they had so many eliminations. As always, hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. Last one for Season 6, let's hope Season 7's a good one. Peace!